workshop, and what we'd like to do is make a brief presentation. If you'll, I'll try to blast through that fairly quickly. If you'll let me get through that, and then we can have a wide-ranging discussion of anything you'd like to talk about, because the purpose of these workshops is to solicit feedback from the community. And this is the third. Last year we had 3 town hall meetings in the west here, in the central and the east part of the watershed, and we're doing the same thing with the workshop. So we started in the east, central, and now we're in the west. So thank all of you for coming, and like I say, the purpose of these workshops is to really solicit input from you all, and you'll kind of see as we lay out the presentation where we're going with all of that. And so I think that there's an introduction I make. Lawrence from Tom Ramsey's office is here with us.
Well, you put me on the spot. Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
Lawrenceville, Harris County Precinct 3, Commissioner Tom Ramsey's office.
Well, Lawrence, I'm sure somebody will want to ask a question.
Okay.
But thank you for joining us. So let me start off with a little bit of background. Some of you I've seen before, but not all of you. The Cypress Creek Drainage Improvement District was created by the Texas legislature just about a year ago, and we put a bill before them. Sam Harvest put a bill before them to create this special district to represent the people in the Cypress Creek watershed. Other watersheds, there's 23 watersheds in Harris County, and most of them have some kind of governmental representation, whether it's the villages or whether it's Meyerland or West U, but there was never a governmental entity to represent Cypress Creek. So that's what this group is. It's a special district to represent the people in Cypress Creek and represent them with respect to flood control. So that's what we're about, and I'll share with you a little bit about where we're going and so forth. Here's the introductions, and we'll use slides over here. There are 5 of us that were the temporary board members that were appointed by the legislature. Mark Adams is here. Claire Lewis, our secretary treasurer. Joe Myers, who lives out in this area, is not with us. And Barbara Schlotman is out of town. Andy Johnson here is our legal counsel, and our engineer is Alan Black with Quiddity Engineering, and
also a Cold resident.
there you go. So we're bringing this kind of close to home here. So that's our group that we have put together. What we'd like to do is talk about a little bit of background information on Cypress Creek flooding. Look at what Harris County Flood Control District is doing on projects along Cypress Creek. We want to share with you kind of the goals that we have laid out for Cypress Creek, and we certainly want feedback on that. Then we want to have a discussion and question and answers, and we're going to we'd like a survey. We've been doing surveys, and we're gathering information, and we're going to use that in our report to the Texas legislature to try to summarize what the people in the Cypress Creek watershed are interested in with respect to flood control. So that's kind of the quick agenda here. On our website, there's a QR code up there, but the website for the Cypress Creek Drainage Improvement District, our town hall presentations are on there, videos are on there. Thanks to Larry Lipton here, who has been videoing these meetings. Those are all on the website that you can find more information. And we keep trying to post things on our website that are of interest. Now, this is the Cypress Creek watershed represented. And on the west, it's in the eastern part of Waller County. 1960, and then the cities of Waller and Prairie View are excluded in this. Then on the north, it goes along FM 2920 and the Grand Parkway. On the south, it's Highway 529 and FM 1960. And then on the east, it's where Spring Creek and Cypress Creek come together. The important part of this information is highlighted there. there's 500,000 people that live in this watershed. You know, that's a really, a large group of people that historically have not been represented as a group. And so part of our purpose is to coalesce our thinking here, bring the thinking of those 500,000 people together, and to present our viewpoints. You know, clearly we want Cypress Creek to be up the scale of priority in terms of spending on flood control. And one of the interesting things that we've learned, Dr. Tina Peterson is the director of the Harris County Flood Control District, and she has shared with us that once the legislature created our group, that we have status with the county. You know, we're invited to the conversations, we're invited to the table to have conversations with them. And so that's been a pleasant and from my standpoint, unexpected kind of outcome of putting this district together, is that we now can have conversations with the county at an important level. This is some, we presented this in our town hall. I'll put a couple of things I just want to talk about here. That this is kind of flooding 101, and you know, what parameters affect the watershed response, the Cypress Creek watershed? Well, it's the rainfall, how much do we have, how long does it last? It's the topography, what does the ground look like across the watershed? You know, what kind of soil and vegetation do we have there? You know, how does the channel work? How does the channel flow and how much water can flow down it? And then what's the land use like? You know, how much cover is on the land? And so if you look at Harris County, in this map, if you look at the topography, you know, where it's the red, you know, out in the west, it's steeper. And so it's steeper, and as you get down toward the coast, it becomes flatter and flatter and flatter. So the water runs off pretty fast out to the west, and not so fast as you progress down toward the coast. Then the soil types and the vegetation, you know, as you get out to the west, where you see the pink there, you've got more open land, but it's sandier. And as you get down toward the coast, it becomes more clay. And so that and there's different kinds of vegetation as you go through there. All that affects how the water runs off. And then the imperviousness is, you know, where's all the concrete? Where are all the roads and the subdivisions? And you see on this map, as you get down toward the center, where you got the big red area, that's where you got all the development, and you got a lot of water running off that. So those are the things that affect, in the Cypress Creek watershed and in Harris County, how we deal with the flood water. So now, Cypress Creek, there's been about 15 prior studies done over the last 20 or 30 years about Cypress Creek and Little Cypress Creek. And in some of our town hall meetings, we went through some of the important ones of those, but there's been a lot of study work done, and there is continuing study work. Harris County Flood Control has current plans to do more study work around Cypress Creek. One of the things that we are planning to do as a group is not more study work. You know, there's a lot of basis to do studies, and so, you know, us trying to gather up another $5 million to do another study, we think we probably have adequate information to go forward and to develop a plan around Cypress Creek. Now, a few important things about Cypress Creek, and on this slide, Upper Cypress Creek, you know, Cypress Creek starts in the Waller area, and it really comes down south, makes a big bend, goes back up, and then goes east. Well, where it makes that big bend, about 2/3 of the water that come down the creek there flow into the Addicks Reservoir. So that's a good thing for the rest of Cypress Creek, but of course that puts a lot of load into the Addicks Reservoir.
In a major event, not perpetual. It doesn't always go flow that way.
Right.
Just in a big event.
Thank you.
Important distinction.
So that's an important consideration, because there's really an interaction with the people that are working on flood control along Buffalo Bayou and the Addicks Reservoir. That's an interaction with Cypress Creek. lands by Harris County Flood Control, Little Cypress Creek has the Frontier Program. The Frontier Program contains 9 basins, 9 stormwater detention basins along Little Cypress Creek, and the cost of that is about $1 billion. So 1 billion with a B. The Cypress Creek implementation plan is 22 detention sites along Cypress Creek, and they're shown on this map here, but that's the cost of another $1 billion.
Can you go back one map real quick?
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay.
And these slides are available on the website.
Okay, thanks.
So then there's the detention basin. So this, people, there's a lot of conversation about, you know, the current plan to put in detention basins along the creek. And the several conclusions that I think we can draw about that. One is, this is not all of, this will not solve all of the problem of flooding along Cypress Creek. I think that's general agreement. But building detention basins along Cypress Creek is a feasible first start. The land was available. Harris County and Harris County Flood Control owned much of the land where you could build detention basins. The technology of how to build them and how to install them is well known. And, you know, you could raise, I mean, the money we're talking about here is a significant amount of money, but over a period of time, it's doable. You could raise that amount of money. So that's where we are with the detention basins. They were a feasible first start of what you might do. Now, you've heard a lot of talk about tunnels, and there's about 8 tunnel alignments that have been talked about in Harris County. And the one on Cypress Creek is about 26 miles long. It starts up Little Cypress Creek, then comes down into Cypress Creek, and then heads all over toward Lake Houston. The current thinking about its cost is about $3.6 billion. So if those were elements of a comprehensive flood mitigation plan, we're talking about $5 billion. And you know that these tunnels, if you know, these are 35, 40-foot diameter tunnels that are anywhere between 50 and 100 feet below the surface. And they would convey water essentially underneath the creek. But they convey a lot of water. I happen to know and we were meeting with Commissioner Ramsey, he talked about the one under Buffalo Bayou. A tunnel under Buffalo Bayou would convey about 15,000 cubic feet per second. Buffalo Bayou itself only conveys about 7,000 cubic feet per second. So these tunnels can move a lot of water pretty quickly. But that's, I wanted to give you a little bit of a snapshot of what some elements of a future strategy along Cypress Creek might look like. Now, let's look at the Harris County Flood Control District project status. The total amount of money spent since the 2018 bond passed was $286 million, and that was updated about a month ago. Is that still kind of close? Okay. Little Cypress Creek, $174 million. Cypress Creek's $174 million. Little Cypress Creek, $112 million. And the projects are listed there. Floodplain preservation, detention basin land purchase, maintenance of the creek and its tributaries, detention basin engineering and construction. Now, we haven't built the detention basins, all of them or many of them yet, but we've done a lot of work on that. A lot of work has been done. And if you notice driving around, all the tributaries have been reworked. All the tributaries that go into the creek. And that, I think about $95 million was spent on all, and those projects are essentially all complete. And so if you look at the bottom there in that red box, it said that 11.4% of the $2.5 billion bond is represented by this 286 million. The Cypress Creek has about 11% of the Harris County population. You know, that the 500,000 people is about 11% of the total population. So on a population basis, the amount of money that's been spent on Cypress Creek is about like the population percentage. But historically, I think Cypress Creek has not had the spending on it that others have had. There's been a lot of, you know, Jim Robinson and his group, and a lot of others have done study that the amount of money spent on Cypress Creek has really been under of the other watersheds. But here recently, we've gotten a fair chunk of the money that's been spent out as bond funds. Now, the current projects that are going on in the Cypress Creek basins, there's the Mercer Basin, construction began in December of 2023. The Westador Basin, construction begins in 2024. TC Jester, there's 4 basins, construction begins in 2024. And there's additional engineering projects that's looking at the Stockton site, which is a very large detention basin at the confluence of Little Cypress Creek and Cypress Creek. And so
It's North Eldridge and Cypress Creek.
huh? Yeah.
Stockton is at North Eldridge and Cypress Creek.
Yeah. And part of the money for these basins came from federal and state earmark grants. They're called community development grants now. So Sam Harvest got about $12 million, and Dan Crenshaw got about 18 or something in that neighborhood. And so we've gotten some state and federal money to come in, and Commissioner Ramsey's goal is, let's start doing something as quickly as we can. Let's start making a difference. So he has been spearheading these projects, and they've gotten the funding in place to put these projects together. So that's kind of the current status of projects that are advancing along Cypress Creek. Now, we sat back, our group sat back and said, okay, if the detention basins are a start, then what's kind of a goal? And what I'll tell you is in that kind of buried in that first sentence is that if you put these detention basins along Cypress Creek as the current plans show, it'll only take about 19% of the structures that were there out of the 100-year floodplain. So that means.
Can you repeat that?
Huh?
Can you repeat that?
If you install the current projects, it will only take about 19% of the structures that out of the 100-year floodplain that have flooded historically. So this is not going to solve all the flooding problems. So our goal is to remove significantly more than the 19%. And we're still working to say, what's the reasonable goal of that number? Is it 30%? Is it 40%? Is it 50%? It's not 100%. I think we can say that with certainty. You know, you can't spend enough money to get them all out.
How many structures are you talking about in total?
In Harvey, I think there was 13,600 structures that flooded, if I remember right.
I don't have that number.
Now,
And
that's-
those will include structures that were outside of the 100-year floodplain.
Yeah.
So
Those are more like
what
fire-
we're talking about is for the basins that were identified as part of the Cypress Creek implementation plan. When excavated in their entirety, and we're talking 15,000 acre feet of a lot of volume, then of the number of homes that are currently in the 100-year floodplain, 19% of them would be removed from the floodplain would be removed from the homes.
And you know, what that really means, you know, it's shrinking down the floodplain. You know, it's not moving the houses. So if you're gonna you gotta lower the elevation of the floodplain, which shrinks it in toward the creek. I mean, that's how you get those houses out of there.
Excuse me,
Then,
I have a question. Are we talking about the old 100-year floodplain or the new one?
old,
Really?
yeah.
Thank you.
So it's when the new one that comes out, which is supposedly soon, it would be less. So, and then what we wanna do is we wanna support the Cypress Creek implementation plan and the Little Cypress Creek Frontier program. We wanna support the increasing conveyance capacity. You know, how do we get the water out of the area faster? And of course, that's a complicated thing because you don't wanna flood somebody downstream. And then we wanna look at tunnel conveyance. And the other thing we wanna look at is if you had a tunnel, could you integrate that with freshwater supply? You know, one of the problems we have that's really not a flood problem, but we've got a water supply problem in Texas and in Houston. You know, if you go along the San Houston Tollway, you see those 10-foot diameter pipelines, that's taking water from the treatment plant of Lake Houston way out west in Harris County. And if you dig into the numbers, you see the cost of water is projected to rise pretty dramatically over time. So is it possible that you could integrate managing floodwater with freshwater supply? And I can tell you that in a cursory look at that, this has got more moving parts than a Swiss watch. You know, this is a complicated undertaking. But what we want to think about, and that's the last bullet point on this slide, is can we integrate the solutions of three major problems: flood mitigation, subsidence, and water supply. Now, I moved to Houston 50 years ago, and subsidence was a topic you only talked about over by Baytown. You know, in the last 50 years, subsidence has really moved a lot across all of Houston. You know, Jersey Village has gone down 7 feet in 40 years. You know, essentially they created a bowl where Jersey Village is. So that's a continuing problem. So we're saying if we had and most people that talk about Cypress Creek agree that there needs to be a comprehensive flood mitigation plan. And so our idea is maybe that can integrate with flood control, freshwater supply, and subsidence. Now, if you think about what can you do to reduce flooding, there is not some huge list of 50 things you can do. You know, here's 6 things that have to do with what you can do with flood control. You can put in regional detention and retention of stormwater. You can increase the surface conveyance. You can look at tunnel conveyance of stormwater. You can integrate stormwater and water supply. You can look at preservation of prairie vegetation. You know, the Gulf Coast Conservancy is looking at restoring prairie vegetation. They're buying up land. And so, you know, land with vegetation will hold more stormwater than land that doesn't have that. And then there are recreational facilities. There's kind of a dual solution here. As you're looking at some of these solutions, you can look at parks and trails and playgrounds. And so these are kind of the major elements that can be in a flood management and resiliency plan. Our engineer down here, Alan represents Quiddity Engineering, and Quiddity has done much work, civil engineering work along Cypress Creek. They have a vast experience and knowledge base about that. And they have put together the framework of a plan for Cypress Creek. And so this plan is outlined there. These are the major segments of the plan that we're working together. And so we are in the process now of funding, raising money to fund that. And so we will tell you that we will gladly accept any donations and they are tax deductible. But we are putting together money to fund that engineering work, and our idea is we're gonna go to the Texas legislature at the end of this year, and we're gonna tell them this is the progress we've made. Here is the framework that we see for a comprehensive flood watershed resiliency plan for Cypress Creek. And of course, we wanna at the same time, get them lined up to give us money for part of that. But that's what our goal is, and we think we have kind of our arms around a plan that we can go to the legislature and present. And then one of the things that we wanna back that up with is to say, here's the input we've gotten from the people in the Cypress Creek watershed. This is what people, think is important to them. This is what they're looking for in terms of flood mitigation. And so we're trying to then get kind of a common viewpoint that we can present to the legislature. This is what the 500,000 people along Cypress Creek are interested in. So that's, and so this is, again, how would those elements of a plan lay out? In Little Cypress Creek, you'd have stormwater detention and retention and surface conveyance. In Upper Cypress Creek, west of Highway 290, you'd have preservation of prairie vegetation, you'd have detention and retention of stormwater there. In the Middle Cypress Creek, you'd have detention and surface conveyance. Lower Cypress Creek, you'd have those things and a tunnel. And so that might be how these elements would come together along Little Cypress Creek and Cypress Creek. And like I say, there's lots more study work, a lot more engineering work, a lot more hydrology work that really has to define what those projects ultimately, how do you get from the current detention projects to that state? That's what we wanna try to add our influence into. Okay, now, the questions we want to get your input into is, rather than try to not have a summary of this, we want to get you to rank the overall flood mitigation strategies and rank each one of them 1 through 5, where 5 is the most important, 1 is the least important. So the regional detention, retention of stormwater, surface conveyance, tunnel conveyance, integrating stormwater and water supply, preservation of prairie vegetation. Then how important is it to include recreational facilities in flood control projects? And Jim Robertson, who has led the Cypress Creek Greenbelt project for about the last 20 years, has done a lot of terrific work in getting trails and parks built along Cypress Creek. Jim, this is a two-pronged approach. This is not an either or. It's not build detention basins or build parks and play. It's how do I integrate both of those things? Then what are your top priority projects? What are your biggest flood concerns? What would you like to see on our website that would better inform you? And then what can this group do for you? If you go to our website, you can get into this particular survey, and it's easy to do. If you use your phone and you scan that QR code, that'll take you directly to a form that you can fill out on your phone. It's pretty easy to fill out.
I could say something about that. On the back of your agenda is the information that Calvin's just brought to you. If you can do this on your phone, do it online, that will be very helpful to us. All of us are volunteers, nobody's paid to do anything, and if you don't do electronics, that's fine. You can fill things out on this form, and then I will put it into the website fillable form. If you could start out by you putting into the website online, that would be the most helpful to us. But regardless, whether it's on the back of this form or on the website, your input is very important to us. We've gotten wonderful response from each of the meetings that we've had, some valuable insights. And this, from this information, this is our documentation that is necessary if we are to present a viable project to the legislature. So, you can use your phone to aim it at that.
I've got a question for you.
Yes.
In the terminology you're using here on conveyance, define it.
Do you want to speak to that?
Conveyance is basically moving water down the channel. So if you
Right.
improve conveyance, you're able to convey more water down the channel.
Philosophically is great. How are you gonna do that? You're talking about pipes or what?
So, and a lot of those ideas have been talked about already. Tunnels is a form of conveyance improvement. Rather than opening up the channel, like for example, some might call this a scorched earth approach. Concrete line the whole dang channel. Water will move faster. That comes at a cost, both financial and a cost to community, that community wouldn't typically support. Similarly, tunnels will dramatically improve conveyance. That will come at a different cost, mostly financial. And so those are the sorts of things that are always balanced, and improving conveyance in Cypress Creek in particular is a real hard nut to crack, in a way of speaking, because each of the alternatives that have and continue to be looked at come with significant costs. Again, that cost could be financial, it could be to the community, and so that is often balanced with, well, what are some of the alternatives? Which is why what you see more often than not these days has been emphasis on additional detention, stormwater detention. Because that's something that can be done where we purchase it right away and excavate large holes in the ground to hold the water back, to try and let some of the water go, hold some of it back, and then slowly release it back into the system. Kind of like what the basin here in front of the neighborhood. That answer your question, kind of, a little more than you asked for?
You know, and the other conveyance, you know, that we all see that's very visible, of course, is Bray's Bayou. And so as Alan said, you know, you want to, it's probably not feasible to convert Cypress Creek to look like Bray's Bayou. In Bray's Bayou, that project was 30 years, 40 years?
It took about 25, 30 years to build, and, but also it was in a different setting, if you will. Most of Bray's Bayou, even before the core project, was not the way Cypress Creek is. Cypress Creek is a very natural channel, whereas Bray's Bayou is a rectified, a man-made channel for all intents and purposes. So every watershed in Harris County is different. They're just like your children. Some respond well to floods, some don't. Water goes up real fast in Bray's and goes down real fast in Bray's, but you've seen it. Water comes up in Cypress Creek and it's up for a week. You know, at Harvey, I had Cypress Creek in my front yard, a mile from the creek. I had Cypress Creek in my front yard for about a week, and that's just the way our watershed responds.
I've already seen some improvement in conveyance of water, since you've already cleaned out the tributaries and you all cleaned out a lot of the debris, as I call it. So I flooded twice, tax day and Harvey in Dorchester. And so I watched this flood gauge, and when you all started doing some of the work, the water is flowing faster. So,
Excuse me,
you know,
do you mean flood control district? No,
Important
no.
distinction.
well, it is.
That work is done by the Harris
Whoever's
County
doing it,
Flood
whoever's-
Control
It's
District.
working, so.
Not,
conveyance.
but we wanna make sure you understand the distinction, is that work was all done by the Harris County Flood Control District,
And
not
it's
by the
working.
drainage group.
Yes.
Not by us.
But keep it up with the work, because the conveyance, you know, you probably have right now.
We'll certainly pass that feedback along.
Well, that brings a question that I wanted some feedback on. What's really the difference between this group and Harris County Flood Control District?
So I'm gonna let our board members fill that.
The Harris County Flood Control represents all the watersheds in Harris County, 23 of them. Cypress Creek is only one of them. And so we represent only one watershed, Cypress Creek. And so our objective is different Harris County Flood Control has to look over the whole county. They have to allocate their resources across all of these different watersheds. And of course, everybody has a story about what they want, what they should do and so forth. What we're trying to do is make sure that Cypress Creek has a priority in the allocation of funds to it, and that it is looked at as an important part of the flood mitigation strategy. Whether it's done by Harris County Flood Control, whether it's done by private developers, or whether this group ultimately does its own projects. We're not in the place now where we would execute new projects, but that doesn't say in the future we might not.
I can see that your kind of charter is much broader than flood control district. And that we were talking about supplying drinking water and protecting prairies and things like that. So is that an important distinction?
Well, go ahead, Amy.
Well, there are multiple things that water can do. Removal of it from the ground can cause the ground to sink. Use of water is responsibility of your local mud as, supplied and controlled by the Science District and the North Harris County Regional Water Authority over most of this area. And then lastly, drainage is the implementation, floodplain implementation is done by Harris County Flood Control District. What this district would do, if granted the power, would be to assist, not assist, but work with federal, state, county, and local entities to piece together a patchwork of funding options where we would gather resources from all of the above, including possibly whatever resources this district would have, to spread out the cost. Because you aren't going to change the cost a lot. And if you're just going to deal with regional detention or just detention ponds, and the Cypress Creek implementation plan, as Calvin suggested a few minutes ago, that comes with a cost. Well, if this district finances 100% of it, it's going to cost the local residents more. But if we could get flood control, state money, federal money, as well as local funds, then it costs less pro rata over the watershed. And it seems to me that that's what this district will bring, is the influence and the opportunity to get multiple streams of revenue to solve what is a very regional problem.
Isn't that what the flood control district is doing all that? What's the difference?
Well, answer is yes and no. The answer is yes, and they have a 4.5 cent tax over the entire county that they collect, and they have to use that to operate, maintain, build additional conveyance or detention over the entire county. And as you can see from the chart that Calvin presented a few minutes ago, out of the last bond issue, we've gotten about 11% of it. Well, where did the rest of it go? It went somewhere else in the county. And so what we believe this entity could do is to leverage the county money so we can get more projects done more quickly, which protects more homes more quickly. That's the goal.
At a higher percentage than 11%.
Yes, if we have multiple streams of revenue, we protect more people faster. That's the goal.
To take a little bit more of the destiny and control that with our own hands.
Correct.
And I think, go ahead.
Before this group came together, because we were unincorporated, there was no one entity that could speak for the whole watershed. We had the how many water did?
140 or 50.
140 or 50 mud districts, but the primary concern of the mud district is what's within that mud district, not the whole watershed. Well, if they did projects and are doing projects within their district, there's no coordination to it, no overall plan. And what we've already found since we came together a year ago, much more attention is being focused on Cypress Creek watershed and projects within it. We have a voice now that is being heard.
One of the things that I think we came to the early conclusion was, when you looked at what needed to be done on Cypress Creek, without any big detailed list of projects, we just kind of a cursory look at that, it's clear that you were gonna have to have federal money, you're gonna have to have state money, you're gonna have to have county money. This is not a problem that, Harris County could solve all on its own from a funding standpoint. So just as Harris County is going out and soliciting state funds and federal funds, you've gotta have money from, in addition to whatever tax money that you can raise. And so that was, an early conclusion is, when you start something like this, you're in the money raising business from the start to the end. I mean, there's two parts, at least my view is, there's two parts of this activity. There's an engineering part to decide what's the best thing to do that'll give you the best results. What's the cost benefit analysis of all that. There's an engineering piece of this, and then there's a money piece of it. And so you have to bring those together. And so it turns out the engineering piece is gonna cost a lot of money.
I have a lot of questions, but right now there's just two. I know it's gonna be an uphill battle, but are there people that are going to commissioner's court, and asking for funding, or do y'all just think it's kind of a waste of time? Because I think we should be sending people there, maybe even in groups. The second thing is, how did we get funding for this Mercer Basin, Westendor Basin, TC Jester? And how's that getting funded? Who spoke up for those areas? You're saying no one's getting it for the Cypress Creek, money's going there for those projects.
Yeah.
Right, so I'll first give you all a little bit of my background. Prior to working at Quiddity up until November of 2022, I was in flood control district. I spent 14 years there. I ran as the interim director, so I'm speaking with the hat of the Cypress Creek Drainage Improvement District on, but sometimes I'll take that hat off and say, hey, look, based on my experience. So specific to your questions, the various basins that do have funding are funded through what I like to call Franken-funding. You basically pull as much money as you can from different sources. The Mercer Basin, for example, is largely funded through community development block grants for disaster recovery. That came out of identifying areas around the county that met the requirements for that program, which is projects that would benefit low to moderate income areas. That's 51% benefiting of low to moderate income areas. So that was Mercer. Westendor is a combination of also community development block grant funding, but also an earmark from one of our Congress members. TC Jester was funded through a combination of earmarks from Congressman Crenshaw, and this isn't even his district anymore, at least the TC Jester area, plus an appropriation from the state through compliments of Representative Parlis, and then some local money from the flood control district. Most of the programs do require a certain amount of local match, and so that's where the flood control district was able to, at least within the confines of, within the lanes they had to stay in based on what Commissioner's Court laid out, was able to dedicate certain funds towards the local match for some of those programs. So that's a long way of answering that, saying, it's been through a number of different funding resources. The basement's right outside of this neighborhood. Congressman Hunt was kind enough to advocate, through mine and Joe Meyer's advocacy with them last year, a $1 million earmark to be able to expand the basin and incorporate some stormwater quality, to be able to get some additional stormwater volume out of it as well. This is in its very infancy stages, so those of you who live in the neighborhood just know there will be a tremendous amount of outreach coming in the months and years to come about what that means. Nobody's doing anything anytime soon. But the point being is that it takes people that know how the system works to be able to work that system and bring those funds in through whatever means necessary. That's a big part about what the drainage district can do, is focus those efforts on bringing funds in for this watershed. The flood control district is gonna have to apply that technique across the entire county, and they're resource limited in terms of people as well as funds available for local match that will be required. So any funding you get from FEMA for a project, that's usually 75-25. So if you wanna build a $10 million project with FEMA funds, 2.5 of that's gonna have to come from the locals. Where does that money come from? And so those are the things that the drainage district can advocate for, is not just bringing the money in, but helping to make sure that the funds are secured for the local match as well. That was a long way of answering that question.
No, that was great.
Good question.
Well, let me give you another, a long-winded addition to that. We, our friend Glenn Wilkerson put together a task force of about 15 people that were interested in the flooding along Cypress Creek. And we were figuring, as we met with Harris County Flood Control, and Jim Robbins was part of that group, Larry, part of that group, and others. And as we started to unfold this, we said, well, this is all about raising money. And so we looked at all the mud districts that were along Cypress Creek, and we looked at the basins that flood control had identified. And we were going down a track that says, well, could we raise, because there was some matching money at the time, we thought, we were looking at how could we raise about $6 million. And we started down that track. And then just, in happenstance, we met Andy. And Andy said, well, what you should think about is putting together a special purpose district. Because if you get the legislature to put together a special purpose district, then maybe you could have more powers that you could get from the state that would help you raise money in a broader way than trying to figure out, could I raise money for this basin or for that basin? And so Andy exposes to a much broader kind of a concept. Now, the one thing that you could get the state legislature to do is give this special purpose district the ability to tax. Now, people don't like taxes. People don't like increased taxes. And you certainly could have never gotten this district approved by the legislature if we would have asked for taxing authority, which we didn't. The two things you can't ask for eminent domain, you can't ask for taxing authority if you want to get something like this approved. So we said, let's get this thing started. Then as we unfold it and we start thinking about how much money do we need, well, and when we're talking about federal money and state money and local money, the only people that have money in that game? Us. We're the only people with money in this game. That's our money. Now, sometimes it's a pretty circuitous path between our money going wherever it goes and getting down to the T.C. Jester Basin, but we're the only people with money in the game here. And so part of our choice is, how do we want to give that money? And so, if we said, I just pick a number out of the air, we've done a little bit of calculation. Say we had a 10-cent tax, 10 cents per $100 of valuation in the whole Cypress Creek watershed. That's around $800 million a year. And so, for the average, say the average house was $350,000, that'd be $350 a year. so people can make a choice to say, would I rather put my 350 there that could come back to Cypress Creek? Or do I wanna, or does it just go off to the federal government or sales tax or wherever? And so it's kind of a choice.
Wait a minute, you're
I don't
not,
think
wait,
we
you're
can
still
police.
gonna pay those other taxes.
Huh?
You still gonna pay those taxes.
Yeah, but I mean.
They're not gonna come back in the same way.
Right.
And it just like with the Harris County water thing, if you don't do the tax, you'll go back for the fee. You can't write the fee off, you write the tax off.
Yeah.
And if you're a taxing authority, if you become a taxing authority, you'll have to get voter approval.
Absolutely.
But the way you're set up, you can take out bonds now without voter approval, and those bonds have to be paid.
No, we do not have the authority to do that.
We don't have the.
You don't have the authority, but you're not a taxing authority. So you mentioned earlier going to the state legislature to have funding given to you. And I wondered if you meant given as in a grant or given as in a bond from the Texas Water
Until you're a
Development.
taxing
Certainly, it
authority,
would
you
have to
can't
be a
get
grant.
matching money. Unless you're a
Like,
taxing authority, you're not gonna get matching.
What did you mean by giving? Did the state
Well,
give?
I think what we're talking about right now, this district has zero authority to raise any revenue. It doesn't have a revenue source, unlike the Regional Water Authority, which has water to sell. And a regulatory requirement that they deliver water, surface water to certain parts of the county. This district, and water districts have tax revenue and water and wastewater revenue. You can't sell drainage unless it's to developers, and that's an option too. And so that could be a revenue source. And it seems to me that the more revenue sources you have, the less local taxation you need. Ultimately, you need to have some type of revenue source, or you're not going to be able to come up with a matching amount to do anyone any good. So ultimately, you would have to have some type of source, like taxes, like grants, like the federal government, and like the Water Development Board, and like the county. But you don't have a way to deliver your local matching piece unless you can get all these other pieces to go with you, which reduces the cost of everything pro rata across the board. So, you just have to make a choice. Do you prefer to not have any improvements done or it take 50 years? Or would you prefer to take 20 years or 30 years, whatever it is, with an incremental cost here while you get other resources to contribute to whatever projects there are that need to be done? And it's very clear that these need to be done. In Little Cypress Creek, the county is requiring developers to pay impact fees that, in their Frontier program, that will provide that $1 billion. The $1 billion for the county to, or the $3.6 billion to come up with the tunnels is something that the county is working on, and that's a 30-year project. So we're looking at something between now and about 30 years. What can we do and bring all these other resources to bear for about one? So that's what we're kind of looking at, which seems to be an attainable goal that could be participated in by the entire community.
Well, I respect your answer, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I didn't hear an answer to what is meant by getting the legislature to give you money.
No,
Are you talking about something that is gonna be paid back? Because the money they're giving you is the taxpayers' money already. And so the taxpayer sends the money to the state, and then the state sends it to Texas Water Development Board, and then you can bond for them, and then you start charging a fee, then the taxpayer has money going out the other door to pay for using their own money, and the state charges you interest.
So that's not how the flood infrastructure fund
No,
managed through the
I'm
Texas
not
Water
against the
Development Board
financial
works,
fund.
so.
So the interest that you're using your tax dollars for things it was intended to be used for, and you have to pay it back with interest. That makes no sense either, but that's a legislative problem.
So let me help you understand the way that the Texas Water Development Board participates in the flood business. So they were only provided that mission by the legislature starting in 2019. And so they established the Flood Infrastructure Fund. So they initially established $750 million and rolled out a program where you could apply for funding for that. They offered funding through two different avenues. Either there is some grant money available, which is truly that, just a grant. And then you could either pay the balance of your project using your own local funds, or you could take out a 0% interest loan from the Water Development Board, which is basically a bond sale to the TWD.
Right.
So that's how they're in the flood business. Now, when we talk about working with the legislature for appropriations, that appropriations can come as a one-time lump sum dollar, here you go. And that has been done. In fact, that's exactly what Representative Harless did for T.C. Chester. That money did not flow through the flood infrastructure fund. The Water Development Board was used as an avenue for those funds, but it was not a loan, it was not a bond sale, it was a straight up grant of $12 million for the T.C. Chester Basin. So there's a lot of different ways that the legislature can move those funds. Their annual program is through the Flood Infrastructure Fund, and that's what the TWDB has started to enter into an annual rhythm for. There are rules attached, and it's good. It's a competitive process, which is why we're trying to advocate using our relationships with representatives to say, hey, look, this is a competitive process that every year is what's called oversubscribed, meaning if they have $750 million to dole out, they'll get $5 billion worth of applications. So it's always oversubscribed, and you're competing with everybody else across the state. Going for a direct appropriation through the awesome work of this board and Representative Harless is a straight up move to the top of the list, here's $12 million. And that, I think, is what we're more talking about in terms of getting money from the state. Now, other sources of revenue also include whether it's the authority to tax, or whether it's the authority to implement some kind of usage fee, whatever that might look like. You know, what Andy's point was is that you're not gonna build anything with nothing. And so there has to be, if there is a desire within the Cypress Creek watershed residents to do more than what our other agencies are limited to do, i.e. the Harris County Flood Control District, the money has to come from somewhere. And this is what the board is working on, is to figure out where can those funds come from.
And you know, and when you think about the magnitude of it, if we're going to the state as, through our representatives, as Alan just described, we're talking about a few tens of millions. 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, I mean, that's the kind of magnitude we're talking. And we're talking about a few tens of million against $1 billion need.
Exactly.
If you looked at taxation, you know, the little example I gave, you're talking about 800 million a year versus the need. So there's a big difference between taxes that 500,000 people might choose to pay versus some of these other funds. And so this is, and as somebody mentioned, you know, none of this could be done without the voters approving it. But ultimately, that's gonna be a choice that people may wanna make.
Okay, I have one other question. Since you're the engineer, I have an engineering question. I noticed on the slide where you had some of the solutions for Creek, there was nothing in there about interbasin transfers. Did y'all rule that out from the engineering department?
So I'll answer that in a different way. Any flood risk mitigation project that is built is prohibited by the rules that we put in place as both as engineers and as a county from transferring that risk to somebody else. What that means is, like for example, go to conveyance. If we wanted to increase the conveyance of Cypress Creek between Barker Cypress and Telge, you could do that, but it would push more water downstream and start to increase the risk of flooding downstream. And we don't do that. Every single project that the flood control district builds does not increase the risk for somebody else. So if we wanted to do an interbasin transfer, you can send more water from Cypress Creek down to the reservoir, but we gotta make sure we don't flood the people down in Addison and Barker, but we gotta make sure you don't flood people down there.
Well, that's.
Now, having said all that, I will offer one little nugget. So we talk about the tunnels, right? The tunnels represent a truly unique opportunity to truly look at interbasin transfers. The idea being is that if you've got a system of tunnels that starts up in Cypress Creek and works its way down the system, you got some coming from Buffalo, and you got some coming up to White Oak and Hunting and Greens Bayou, and there's some interconnectivity there. Well, with the exception of Harvey, when it floods, it doesn't necessarily flood everywhere, right? And so if it's raining really hard up in Cypress, but it's not raining at all in some of the other watersheds, then that's where that kind of interbasin transfer could be reasonable. To say, look, the tunnel's empty down here, let's send some of it down there to be able to help bring some more water off of that watershed. So that is something that will be considered as part of what the flood control district is currently taking the next step on. It's called the SAFER study. You've heard them talking about tunnels in the past. That is now working towards a process that will federalize the effort, that will allow the federal government someday in the future to maybe invest money in the tunnels. That has to start with a federalization of the process, and that's what they're doing right now. They've selected their consultant, they're negotiating through that, and they'll be working that process. It'll take a couple of years. But that's the first real opportunity to look at that kind of interbasin transfer.
Can I ask a question?
This gentleman here said a question, let's get to him.
Thank you. It might be more of a suggestion. Kind of engineering suggestion. A couple years back, we got the new intensities from Atlas 14, right? So in your early slides, you discuss, hey, what contributes to flooding? You know, the impervious cover, the intensities, et cetera. One thing I believe that hasn't been adjusted is the land use. And this might be controversial right now because if I suggest to increase the C value, so which is the impervious cover for residential or commercial, so that in turn, you know, development would have to contain more. You know, and developers would say, well, that's gonna cost more money for me and the owner or the residents are gonna have to pay more money. But at the end, everybody's gonna have to pay that money. At some point, it's gonna have to come out. So that, I think, yes, it's controversial maybe, but it also helps in the future, you know, cover us from the future development that's coming, because I saw all of that going to Waller. There's a bunch of development in Waller right now. So it's all impervious, undeveloped, you know, agricultural, but it's gonna start covering up, and if we are a little bit more strict on these detentions and you know, it could stop the problem instead of having the problem here all the time. At some point, it should stop. Hopefully that, adjusting that to the color. It's just a suggestion. I'm not sure who to suggest it to, but I figured.
Sure. Well, where that kind of comment I think will be most take on what will be a real challenge. So, just a little bit of background is that coming out of Hurricane Harvey, we decided we're gonna go ahead and redo the floodplain maps using Atlas 14, using Rain on Grid, First in the Nation. These are gonna be the best real representations of flood risk in the entire country. We also wanted to take some steps to approximate what those results might look like now for the development community. So that's when it was adopted to regulate towards the 500-year floodplain rather than 100-year floodplain. And so new communities that are built have to regulate their elevations based on the current effective 500-year floodplain rather than 100. Because we knew that Atlas 14 results and will show that the new 100-year floodplain is really closer to today's 500-year floodplain. So Atlas 14 kind of recognized the changes in rainfall over the last 40 years. There's more coming down. It's coming down harder now, right? So that's a way of approximating it. Where is going to be interesting conversation is going to be is that when the new floodplains are then adopted, will the county continue to regulate to the 500-year, or will it back off to the 100-year? Think about that for a minute. So that is a real challenge and a real political message. That's not something that the Cypress Creek Drainage Improvement District is directly involved in, and that's something that we'll be working more on over the days, weeks, and months to come, is to better illustrate, for y'all's sake, what we have some control over, or where we think we can advocate for, and where it's really, hey, look, those are great points that need to be brought up, because it's not just about Cypress Creek, it's about all of the watersheds. That make sense?
Yeah, and then that is already a suggestion in the 2024 state water plan, I think, if you saw a draft of it.
Who do you work for? No, this is great. We can have a good
I got
conversation.
it from TFMA.
Okay.
They look at
Yeah.
this, and I saw it.
All right, awesome.
And,
Yeah.
So I thought, those are.
As soon as you said C value, I was like,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think it's important because,
Fair enough.
Atlas 14 changed, maybe we should consider changing other things.
Could be.
Can I ask a question? I'm trying to ask a question
Yes.
for an hour.
Go ahead.
Finally. For us that are older, I've owned my home and built it, and I'm a former developer and home builder in the area. And I've built a lot of homes.
Can you speak up so we can hear you?
Yeah, I'm a former developer and builder, and I've built a lot of stuff in Harris County over the years. Built my house in Dorchester 28 years ago. I'm 80 years old, and all this sounds great, but what I'm getting from you guys is that for us that are actually homeowners, that have been homeowners for decades, there's nothing that's gonna happen to prevent us from flooding. All the programs you're talking about are gonna cost billions of dollars. It's gonna take a lot of time, a lot of political muscle to get it done. So for us that are sitting here, that are a lot older, that have been here for 28 years and have paid a tremendous amount of taxes to the Harris County and everybody else, is that I don't really see that anything is gonna be immediate, that's gonna protect us from flooding. And it's been 7 years since Harvey, and we've passed all these bond issues and stuff like this, and all I hear is that we're gonna dig a hole here, we're gonna dig a hole here, we're gonna buy out all these houses, tear them down, and destroy the tax basis for the school district, for the county, for the HOAs, but don't see that there's anything immediately that's going to assist the ones of us that have been here for decades, that made a financial investment in this area, okay? Money's gone someplace else, but if you're living where we live, every time it floods or rains, my wife looks at me and says, do we need to get a boat? And we've had 6 floods in Dorchester, and the last 2 were, I had 60 inches in my house. And I built it up 18 inches 28 years ago, and I wasn't in the floodplain. But as a developer, I said 18 inches ought to be enough. And I got 60 inches on top of the 18 inches, okay? So I guess what I'm hearing is that it's gonna take 30 years and $5 billion to put a tunnel system in. I'm not gonna be alive in 30 years, So I guess what I came to this meeting was to find out, is there anything that's happening immediately that on a short-term basis is gonna assist us as homeowners in the areas that we live? Or like someone told us that if you're real smart, you just need to sell out and move because you're not old enough or young enough to be able to survive all these different plans that are being planned. You know, it's like, sounds great, you know, but you know, for me sitting here, what I'm getting out of this meeting is that I need to get the hell out of town, you know, because there's nothing that's gonna help me in the next 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years.
Well,
You know,
you know, Dan, I'm like you. Although I built my house not very far from yours 47 years ago.
Yeah,
And so I understand, but the shortest term thing that can be done is building the detention basins that have already been planned and designed. And so getting increased funding pushed into those projects is the shortest term thing that you can do. And we've already said that will not solve all the flooding problems, but that will help. You know, I mean, you know, when you take out the first scoop of dirt, that helps a little.
right.
So that's the shortest term thing, but this is a long-term problem. I mean, this is a 40, 50-year problem in total.
And a little bit of perspective to help understand what even those detention basins means in terms of what it takes to accomplish it. So what's been identified is about 15,000, I wanna say, I'm coming off the top of my head, 15,000 acre feet of stormwater detention to be excavated in the Cypress Creek watershed. To put that in perspective, since the flood control district was created back in 1937, across the entire county, they've excavated a little more than 60,000 acre feet. So what we're talking about as a need just to reduce the risk of flooding for 19% of those that are currently in the floodplain is, what, a quarter of what the entire flood control district has done since they were created across the entire county. To give you a perspective of how big that number is, it's a tremendous amount of excavation. And I'm not gonna say it's a drop in the bucket, but the scale is simply hard to imagine. There is nothing that will immediately reduce the risk of flooding for any one particular home. The problem is too big, which is why you'll hear it over and over again. Get flood insurance. Protect yourself while plans that can be executed over the next 1, 2, 10, 30 years are worked on.
Well, and you know, what Commissioner Ramsey's push is, let's try to get the money we can round up to do things we can do quickly as opposed to waiting for 5 or 10 years down the road. Let's try to round up the money that we can round up, and let's start working the projects as best we can.
And one of the great things that Commissioner Ramsey's office is doing is initiating some of the preliminary engineering studies on these basins that will put them in a position to advocate for funding. Because, and this is the world I live in now, this is my job these days, is to help my clients across the state bring in local, state, and federal funds. You can't get money from people for nothing. You gotta be able to show what you're gonna build. You gotta be able to show it'll work, right? That takes some initial investment. And that's what Commissioner Ramsey's office is doing, is making those initial investments in some of the preliminary engineering studies to be able to say, look, this is what we can do if we had the money, so we can put that in front of TWDB. We can put that in front of the state, in front of the feds, EPA, you name it, to be able to advocate for some of the additional funds. And so I absolutely applaud what Commissioner Ramsey has been doing with very limited resources.
Now, I will tell you, I had a thought that escaped my mind there. You talk about what can you do short term? There's some projects that Commissioner Ramsey is doing that is looking at on the so-called wet bottom basins, like the Cypress Park there on Eldridge at the creek. They are installing pipelines and gates that can lower that lake level 5 feet in anticipation of a storm. So if you take a lake that lake's nominally 10 feet deep, you know, it normally. So if you lower that down by half, you really, in anticipation of a storm, you really provide a lot more storage for stormwater. So there's a number of those, there's some projects where all you need is pipelines and a gate because of the elevation of the lake versus the creek. There's others where you'd have to have pumps to pump some of the water out into the creek. But those are some short-term projects, some things that you can do that are not only a few $1 million, that you can find some of that money available, that can help some in the short term.
I'd like to respond. I've been out here since 1973. I'm now gonna be 74 years old, and I've had a really good run. And I'm working my heart out now for the people who are coming. Yeah, I'm probably not gonna see any of it. But if what we do now makes it good for people like him, he's the future. We've all lived out here when it was gorgeous, it was quiet, and now it's not so quiet, we don't have deer anymore, but we got hospitals, and we don't have to drive miles. So I think what y'all are doing is great. You've done a whole lot in the first year. And if you do have to know how to play the game. And it looks like y'all are pretty good at playing the game. Whatever we can do to help you, we're happy to do. And I think that's why we're here. We're not gonna see any benefit. I'm gonna be 74. I mean, you know, every time it rains, I get a flood gauge 1160, and I'm here to tell you, they have done something, that conveyance of water is better. It's moving faster. Now, we haven't had any parties lately. But y'all, just keep it up. And those of us who are elderly, and we've been out here, and we say, I've been out here 30, 40, 50 years, we've had a real good time. So let's make it really good for the young people. And if it takes tax money, we can't take it with us. So we might as well spend it on people like him and all the other guys. That's just my opinion.
Good point.
Okay.
Update status on the Ravenel property. Harris County negotiating for that property.
Yeah.
Not included in the 19.
Right, that's one of the questions we're often asked about Ravenel. And I talked to the head of their PUD just this week. And they are about to come to an agreement with the county to exchange the 27 acres that the county bought where the Ravenel Club was for 125 acres that's near the creek. And they have an agreement in hand, and they hope to have a signed contract with the county within the next month or two. That would then essentially trade those lands, and there would be the 125 acres would be the site of detention basins along Cypress Creek. So that's where that is.
The Ravenel Basin is part of the Cypress Creek implementation plan. And so when we talk about the 15,000 acre feet that were identified as part of the implementation plan, the Ravenel Basin is considered a component of that.
And if you go to the,
Piece of land is
So Longwood is technically in the Little Cypress Creek watershed. So it's not a part of the implementation plan per se, it is part of the Little Cypress Creek Frontier Program. I'll offer that there are CDBG, that's Community Development Block Grant funds, in the disaster recovery flavor that are targeted for that basin. They have a consultant that's been selected to do the design. And so there will be work and ideally communication and outreach to the community about that very soon. So there's a timeline associated with those funds to be spent. So there's property that was purchased on both sides of Little Cypress Creek along the golf course, and it's only on one of those cells where that excavation will happen. There's not enough funding to do all of it, so it'll be a start, but they won't finish it. So that's the other part that will hopefully be communicated in a way to the community. And for what it's worth, I know and I'm good friends with the consultant that was selected for that work, and I had lunch with them last week, telling them everything I know about the project. So they're gonna be pointed in the right direction, they're gonna be working with the community.
No conveyance involved.
Sorry?
No conveyance changes involved.
No, not yet. But the purpose of that stormwater detention basin is to provide the negation for future conveyance improvements. Remember I said you can't transfer the risk? They need to build a basin so they can ultimately someday do the channel improvements as well.
Could they do the channel improvements before all of Cypress Creek downstream of them?
So-
Completed?
So you have to look at it in terms of where your improvements are. If you're doing improvements to Little Cypress Creek right through Longwood, that's where you need to offset the water with additional detention. And that's exactly what they're doing. It's just a phased approach. They've got money to do the detention now, and then in the future, they'll look for money to try and do the channel improvements as well.
On our website, there's a documents page, and there are links on there to those projects. The links go to the Harris County Flood Control, where those reports are stored. But we've taken those things that are relative to the Cypress Creek watershed and put links on our webpage to make it easier for you to access and to get more detailed information about that. So please use our website.
Does it also include the Cypress Creek implementation plan?
Yes, it
Okay.
does.
I was gonna suggest the information on the implementation plan is there as well. So at our website or Harris County. Yes.
I'd like to say, when y'all suggested get flood insurance, I can no longer afford flood insurance. It was $800 and I didn't even flood last time. This lady mentioned flooding has improved. No, I'm living on Eldridge and I've had high water twice just this year. And so, no, it has not gotten better. You know why? Because there's more developing, they're building up like 18 inches, and it's causing this residents to flood. That's what's happening. And y'all talked about a detention basin, that Stockton area, Grant Road. That's where there's trees and cows. And so where's the deer and the cows and all that gonna go? When that gets, when y'all take up all our trees, how can the water get back into the ground when you're gonna, build a detention basin on it? But what I really have been wanting to say is two other things. If you want funding so bad, go to Commissioner's Court to advocate for it, so the other commissioners can hear y'all talking to Tom Ramsey and asking for the funding. I don't see why y'all aren't doing that. And the last thing is, right now I'm not for this. Maybe one day I will be. I'm for the idea of what you're doing. Who doesn't want to mitigate flooding? But my problem is, when y'all went to the legislature and our state rep went, Sam Harless, he says, we are not going to be a taxing authority. But then yet, I've heard it several times, this meeting and other meeting, that you have to be a taxing authority, and that's the plan, to go be a taxing authority. So what I'm really mad at is the lie. You lied to us. That's what I'm really mad about. I'm for mitigating flooding, but you lied to us. Don't lie to me. Thank you.
Well, that was pretty direct.
You know I'm very direct,
I
right?
know you're very direct. I know.
Because I was there. Our state rep said, we're not gonna try to be a taxing authority.
Well,
And then y'all come around and at that same meeting, I know who it was, that said, we want to be able to go back for more powers and to be a taxing authority. And I've heard it a few times tonight. And you lied. Why lie about it? Why not tell the truth from the beginning? Why do you want to lie to us people that are gonna have to be paying for this?
No, I think that what you're seeing from the legislature is, okay, you want to be a taxing authority when you grow up. Come back to, and this is what this group was told. Do some work in the interim, because the legislature meets every 2 years, and come back to the legislature with what you find out from the public, what you find out other resources are, what you find out the needs are, and what this entity could do to improve the situation, and come back to us with a plan.
Right.
I'll give you an example. The first time that we met with Commissioner Ramsey, we put some paper on the table. And he said, this isn't a plan. I can't support this. And so we said, whoa, we thought it was pretty good. And so we went back and we did more homework. We met with people, we found out what might be considered a plan. And a couple or 3 or 4 months later, we came back and met with Commissioner Ramsey and others. And he looked at the revisions to our plan and said, this is something I could support. And then we got to the legislature, and the legislature was not in favor of it. And they said, come back with a better plan. And so the authority was given to this group to go out and figure out what the watershed needs, what the resources might be to accomplish what the watershed needs, how much protection could we get for how much money, how long will it take, and I mean, there are so many facets to this as you've been hearing tonight. And so the plan, I believe, would be to put together a plan for the legislature, tell the legislature what has been done in the last year and a half, what the potential plan would be, how it would be accomplished, how long it would take, and what resources does this group need to accomplish the plan in conjunction with all of the other resources that are out there that have been described tonight. So I think this is a multi-plan, multifaceted plan to come up with something that can help all the residents of the watershed. It's not foolproof and it's not free. And it's going to take a lot of work by these folks, by Commissioner Ramsey, by Representative Harless and the other representatives, and state lawmakers, and our congressmen. So this is a heavy lift over a long period of time, and I identify with the folks that are here that said, I'm not going to see the end of this. And I promise that many of us won't see the end of it and don't expect to, because I think it is our responsibility to leave our communities better than we found them.
And the cost of this is gonna make us have to leave our community, because we're paying the fees for that North Harris County Regional Water Authority, and this district is in that same area. And so now we're gonna be paying more.
Dang water authority.
Right. And so the problem is, Sam Harless put out a newsletter at the very beginning, a year ago, whatever, saying, well, we're not gonna be a taxing authority. That's what he told his constituents. Right.
Well,
And it's
And
still,
the other thing, the second part of that is, you're on the Brookshire-Katy Drainage Improvement District, right? You're that attorney?
Yes.
So you already are familiar with, a long, long time ago, 1960 or something, when it was created, it didn't have taxing authority. 4 years later, or however many years later, I think it wasn't too long later, it went back for taxing authority. So I think, I know you're already familiar, I hate to pick on you, but I know you're already familiar with the Brookshire-Katy Drainage Improvement District, so y'all already knew the plan, I just don't like being lied to.
Let me talk about community, because we are in a community. And I will tell you that in the 1980s, mid-80s, I went with several of my clients and others, total of 29 districts, to tell the
do we wanna have this conversation, or it might be good to kind of get back on subject
Okay,
regarding
all right.
Cypress Creek?
Well, anyway, we went as a community to contest what we had to do, and ended up in a 13-year fight before we had the water authority. And it's about the community needing to raise the resources in order to solve a problem that's bigger than our community. And so that's all we're doing here, is trying to solve a giant
Let's do
problem.
Jim and then you. Jim?
A question and a comment. Relative to this tax authority, am I correct in the assumption that I have that this entity could not tax unless we approve it?
Unless the vote is
Absolutely.
approved.
So-
First, the legislature has to give the tax authority, and you wanna talk about the confirmation requirements for the district?
Okay.
Yeah.
You, go.
When this district was established, it had 4 years to have an election where the district has to be confirmed by the voters. So we can exist for 4 years, and the voters have to confirm that they have to vote to keep this district intact.
And that's with or without tax, which
That is-
still isn't even a part of the.
So that's that part. But anyway, go ahead, Jim.
Sorry, about the deal.
Well, I'm just, the point is that this group cannot tax, I'd like to hear this. Well, I'll speak to the rest of the group. The point is, this group cannot tax us unless we vote for it, assuming the legislature gives us authority. So, and that was clear to me from the very beginning. I don't think we were lying to you.
No,
But all I'm saying, I expressed my opinion, that was my impression from the very beginning, that we can never be taxed unless the residents of the Cypress Creek watershed vote for that ultimately is the only way it can be done.
Right.
And that was a principle that was established at the Boston Tea Party.
Yeah.
I mean, a very long time ago. I mean,
But I just wanted to make that. I guess the other comment, we've talked about the advocacy role with this. I don't think we can underestimate the importance of this group as an advocacy group for the Cypress Creek watershed. In the Cypress Creek Flood Control Coalition, we've advocated for years for increased funding. We did get increased funding at 11.4% or whatever it was in the bond issue. I think it was at least in part as high as it was because of advocacy that got more focus on the Cypress Creek watershed. We have one commissioner at Commissioners Court that's speaking for us, and we've got 3 ed commissioners and a judge that don't go along with what we're trying to do. It has been said at Commissioners Court that the Greens Bayou watershed has been neglected for years. It's been underfunded. Greens Bayou watershed has 3 times the amount of flood control managed detention than the Cypress Creek watershed does. I mean, that's what we're up against at Commissioners Court. And, you know, just going down to Commissioners, I've gone to Commissioners Court, I've spoken to Commissioners Court. And you're down there speaking, and the other commissioners are talking on their phone, or
Right.
texting.
you're right about that.
And so, you know, this group can be effective in advocacy, but it needs to be done wisely, but there's a real need for it. And I think, in my mind, this is probably the greatest benefit that we have from this in the near term, is to start to get more focus on our watershed, and I appreciate what you're doing in that one. Thank you for the moment.
I've been sitting here listening to all this, dealing with financial affairs and what might be and so forth, and projections for so many billions of dollars to spend and so forth. I had one word about the real solution to stopping this flooding problem we're having. And the essence of the solution is to do something about the drainage from the creek, to expedite the movement of the water down, convey it to where it's I asked earlier. And you can put all the detention basins up along the creek that you want, spend millions and billions of dollars in so doing. And every one of those detention basins has an outlet or a pump. And when they get to a certain level, they're gonna release water back to the creek in order that the detention basin can support the particular subdivision or area in the first place, which is what it was designed primarily to do. And so when the creek fills up,
the detention basins have got no place to displace their water. So, where are we? I mean, unless you move the water downstream out of the creek to the river and to the Gulf, we're going nowhere. And you sit there and say 30 years from now, 30 years from now, I'm 78 years old, we're going on it. I'm gonna be dead, I might be dead tomorrow, I don't know. But, this is getting frustrating because I want something done now, and we've been sitting here attending we being me and various friends of mine, have been attending these sorts of meetings for, what, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, I don't know, a long time. And you hear various governmental agencies saying, we're gonna do this, or we're gonna do this, or we get this bondage. Nothing happens, nothing to speak of anyway. And so flooding will continue until you clean out that creek, if you put a tunnel on it, great. But whatever you do, that's the solution. I don't think it's more detention basins. Matter of fact, we got one proposed for the Dorchester area in a 29-acre forest that's, got cypress wood on the south side and Jones Road on the east side and the creek on the other side. And I live adjacent to that area. I sit there and watch the floods. I know exactly, I know better than an engineer what's gonna happen because I know what I see. And it's nice, and I know you gotta go somewhere and you have to do something, but until you move that water out of there, all this is just, it's really for naught. These detention basins help with an intermediate flood, but nothing like the tax day flood. I won't even use Harvey, because what he said about the water in his house, I had as much in my house as well. But, things have changed, but we seem to be, I appreciate you all as volunteers sitting here, and certainly this advocacy group is a positive step. But I don't see any solution for me. I'm gonna be dead by the time anything happens.
Me too, but if we had started when I was 35 instead of when I'm 72, we'd be further down the road. And that's where I think we need to start.
I think that's why all of us have gotten involved, is that, you know, we all know that it's a huge problem. But you have to stop somewhere, and why I'm interested and involved in it is that I see this group as coming up with an actual plan. Before we just keep doing these patchwork things along with, there needs to be some overall plan, some goal, and then we have to start.
Well, an additional thing, a little tiny thing that can be done, engineer, is get people out there, and former Harris County Flag Patrol, get people out there and just clean out the creek, clean the debris out of the creek. There are logs and debris and stuff that's slowing the flow of the water. Just clean the creek out all the way down to Spring
So
Creek.
if you ever see any obstructions to flow, such as trees down, all you have to do is call that into the flood control district.
No,
not that easy.
We've got trees that are 12, 14 inches in diameter, growing in channel 1.
Growing trees is different from, I said fallen trees.
You said fallen,
That's
but
right.
they impede the flow of water because they're in the channel. They're not up on the bank, they're on the bank too.
You know, I asked one of these questions before, when we had a big, I've been in so many meetings, I should be on your committee, you know, cause I've been in these meetings, but the last one I went to, it was like 400 or 500 people there, and the commissioners were there, and I asked a question about how do you go about getting the money and getting the work done and stuff like that. And the Army Corps of Engineers were there, and I worked with the Army Corps of Engineers for years, you know, in Washington and also here in Houston. And they told me, said, we really can't do anything with the creek because it's under federal jurisdiction, because Cypress Creek is considered a national waterway.
That's the water of the US, yes,
Yeah.
that's correct.
And so I asked, I haven't seen any cruise ships going down it, you know, but, they said that, you know, this is the Army Corps of Engineers talking, not you guys, okay? And they said in order for anything to be done with Cypress Creek, there had to be a sponsorship where there was coordination between local, either the county or the flood control or something like that.
For core investment.
Yeah,
yes.
and then the plans had to be developed, and I asked how long it would take to do, and you're an engineer, and plans take as long as 18 months to do all the hydrology and everything else.
So it's even longer than that. I'll give you Core 101 in about 45 seconds. I'll try to do this very quickly. So, in order for the Corps of Engineers to be involved in a project, the United States Congress has to say, go study this problem. And they only do that every 2 years through what's called the Water Resources Development Act. That gives them the authority to go and study it. Then Congress has to appropriate funds to go and study it. Once those two things happen, the Corps can implement their 3+3+3. That's 3 years, $3 million, 3 levels of review. At the end of that review process, at the end of that study is then submitted to the chief engineer of the Corps of Engineers, who then submits that to Congress and says, please authorize us to go and design and construct something. And so that has to be a new congressional authority, congressional authorization through that every other year Water Resources Development Act to say, okay, now you have the authority to go design and build something, and then Congress has to appropriate funds to do that. And so you're now, 5, 6 years down the road before you've even started designing something that hopefully Congress will fund to build. That's why projects like Project Braves and White Oak and Sims and the Greaves Federal Project, which is a small stretch of it, take decades.
That's why they haven't been able to do the improvements.
Longwood is not a core project. So there's two different things here going on. There's core involvement to actually build a water resources project. That's the process I just told you about. The Corps also gets involved when it comes to compliance with Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. That's the waters of the U.S. The idea is that while you're not seeing a cruise ship going down there, these are waters that contribute to the quality of the water that we drink, and that's where the Corps takes jurisdiction over that. Is to say, if you're going to go in and streamline and channelize Cypress Creek, you have now impacted the quality of the water for this region. And that has to be offset with mitigation. Trouble is, there's no level of mitigation that's available where you can say, hey, I'm impacting it here, I'm gonna offset it over here. That doesn't exist. You have to do it within the confines of your existing project, which is what then quadruples the cost of your project.
That's why you can't just say, well, why don't we just clean the creek out?
That's right.
But you have done some creek cleaning out.
Some. You can do selective clearing. There are limitations on what you can do in terms of fill below the what's called the ordinary high water mark. I can talk about this crap for days. It really is mind numbing how long it takes to get to a permit to be able to do work like this.
That's why you
They've
don't.
done it now in 2 minutes.
So, well, I was finished with the core process after 45 seconds. I'll stop there.
In light of what Alan just said, Alan, you can speak to this, but there is a project being designed for sediment removal in Cypress.
So what we did, and this was kind of cool. I'm really proud of this. This is making our money go further, right? Hurricane Harvey caused a lot of erosion, a lot of sediment to get deposited in different places, which reduces the capacity of the channel, right? So what we did is we said, well, that's something that FEMA can pay for from a disaster, right? So we did pre and post comparison across the entire county and said, where can we prove that sediment has been deposited? And Cypress Creek is one of those watersheds where we were able to show this is how much sediment has been deposited. Coming out of Harvey, federally funded recovery through FEMA was funded at 90-10. So 90% feds, 10% local. Then the state stepped up and said, for all the agencies that were impacted by Harvey, we're gonna reimburse you for 75% of your local cost. So we put together a program for Harris County to remove $250 million worth of sediment and watersheds that include Cypress Creek for a total local cost of $6.25 million.
That's right.
Yeah, and so some of that includes Cypress Creek. The catch is all that sediment you can only do work above the ordinary high water mark. Otherwise, you trigger an individual permit through Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. Blah blah blah. So it's a constant balance in juggling between what are the permit requirements and what can I do and how can I get something done now.
And I think the bottom line here is this group, if given additional powers by the legislature, and this is where we need your help, will enable this watershed to access significantly more federal and state and perhaps county resources that will help the community than could ever be done if it was not here, or not here, and, or if it acted alone and tried to do everything by itself. That's the key, and it's just like everything else, it's leverage. How do you leverage the funds to go as far as possible to help the community? Period. End of story.
Well, can't you use, I mean, I've noticed people here, a lot of district board members, my wife was one, you know, one district can't shove water onto another district. That's state law, okay? But there are districts that line the creek, and they are a taxing authority, and they are proactive, and they are all members of the community that they serve on the boards for. So they are collectively together a publicly elected jurisdiction. Last time I went to vote in the national election, I voted for the president first and my wife last, okay? So they are a public recognized authority that basically their responsibility is to collect taxes to improve certain things, water, you know, sewage and stuff like that. But it's to their best interest not to lose any more residents. And that's what's happening. Is that even the CYPRESS school district, which has been omnipotent in terms of raising money, they're $1.5 billion short this year. Okay, I wonder how much of that's been affected by the reduction of buying out residential homes.
So the whole buyout program is actually quite small in the second
That's not
quarter.
right.
I think it's very small, but.
And it's only in some very specific areas. You'd be surprised the numbers that we're talking about. It's a couple hundred.
Well, on my street, you know, if you look at my street, the amount of homes that have been purchased and bought out is significant. It looks like a park. Okay.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being here. I know these, our conversations are important, your feedback is important, and I want to thank you all for doing that, and we will continue to have these meetings. I want to encourage you to go to our website. If you haven't given us feedback through the forums that are there, we ask that you do that, because we will be summarizing them and presenting them with our case to the legislature. So again, thank all of you for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for y'all's time.
So tax state, just for the record, tax state is the.
Yes.